Mellencamp was my first rock and roll uh, obsession, and Mellencamp has always fascinated me, and one of the reasons why he appears so frequently in my current book, Exurbia Now, is that he's, uh, well, as he phrased it, when I interviewed him, he said, I'm a blue guy in a red state, and I live in Indiana, so that's my status as well. And furthermore, he lives in a small town. I live in a small town. So from an early age, I found that I could relate to the stories he was telling through song. In Minutes to Memories is inspired by his grandfather. Almost every line in that song could apply to my grandfather. When he writes a song like Theo and Weird Henry, which is about, two young guys getting into trouble in a small town, I could relate to that experiences that I had with my friends when we were teenagers and early 20s. So example after example of that uh, eventually led me to want to explore John Mellencamp's music much more thoroughly. Mellencamp himself did not agree to an interview for the book. That would come later after he actually read the book and liked it. Then he was willing to sit down and talk to me, and we did a couple of interviews. But I did have access to several members of his band. You mentioned Mike Wanchick. He was one that I interviewed. He gave one of the most insightful interviews because he had been with Mellencamp from day one. And several people who had worked with Mellencamp in a professional capacity as well. So that book is it's almost a combination of working on a dream in that I do leave room for my own interpretive, critical analysis, but it had a much stronger foundation of access in interviews, if not as strong as Metallica. The book is Exurbia Now, the Battleground of American Democracy. And it's a work of political geography that submits a thesis that journalists and commentators and prognosticators are missing an essential component of what is happening in our democracy right now. Journalists cover the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And this book looks very closely at the where. So where is the MAGA movement most successful? And by zeroing in on the where, and by studying the various economic, social, and cultural conditions of the where, perhaps we can generate insight into the why and into the how. So an exurb is a town that has greater distance from the urban area than a suburb, and less density in terms of population. And what research indicates is that Exurbia is the staging ground, it's the headquarters of the far-right reactionary movement behind Donald Trump. Not only are his electoral numbers highest there in national elections, but the most deranged and anti-democratic Congress people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan represent districts that are predominantly exurban. So what is it about Exurbia Now, that leads to this dangerous form of far-right paranoid politics? I draw on stories in the Chicagoland area and northern Indiana because I live in a town almost on the border of Illinois and Indiana, and we have a little bit of everything here. So as you were just saying, Chicago is one of the bluest cities in America. The Chicago suburbs have changed, however. When I was growing up in the Chicago suburbs were much more Republican. Now they've become almost entirely Democratic. So you can start with that story, how the suburbs in large metro areas are changing and becoming more liberal. And then the exurbs are growing as an adverse reaction to the diversification and liberalization of suburbia. So moving from the Chicago suburbs to where I live in a Democratic congressional district, but it's a closely contested one. So our Congressman Frank Mervan won re-election with about 52% of the vote. So I'm in a district that's almost 50-50. Then when I go into the next county of Indiana, there I'm in absolute Trump country. So we have suburbia and exurbia and these two territories meeting, creating a political collision. And that's why I drew on my own local surroundings to tell the wider story, the larger story of this book. But it's a book about those two main factors, how suburbia is growing much like the country nationwide, more diverse and in many ways more progressive. And then you have this reactionary backlash movement fighting against it that manifests in more local exurban precincts with congresspeople like Gates and Jordan and Green, and manifests nationally with people like Donald Trump. I relied on some great reporting and academic research that's already out there. And I especially did that when I wanted to demonstrate that what I'm describing happening in my neck of the woods is not anomalous. You know, if I, for example, I describe similar things happening in Arizona, similar things happening in Georgia. So that's where I definitely relied upon more journalist and academic research from other sources. But in terms of my own work, I talk to many people, and I base it on not only my own experiences and personal observation, but my own journalism locally. However, one thing I did is I wanted to provide a counter to the constant assertion by implication that real America is best represented by the Trump voter. Since Donald Trump's first campaign, we've had countless reports and stories and television segments interviewing white guys in baseball caps in diners about why they support Donald Trump. And I didn't want my book to add to that amplification. So one of the things I made sure to do is profile people in small towns of different political persuasions, doing different work. People like those involved with PFLAG, which is an LGBTQ youth support group in small towns and suburbs. I talked to people who created an environmental sustainability group in the town in which I live, and spotlight the work they're doing, because I want readers, when they pick up this book, to feel as if they're getting a tour of the area, an impressionistic tour in which they meet characters, so to speak, of different political perspectives, different social backgrounds, different economic experiences, and therefore they can feel as if they have better informed themselves on what's happening in places that too few people care about, and how the battles taking place in those places that too few people care about have national implications and ramifications that we are about to confront big time in November.